This program is brought to you by the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, a nonprofit organization dedicated to sharing with the community the many benefits of a vegetarian diet. Free monthly meetings include vegetarian experts found locally and on the mainland, quick and easy cooking demonstrations, and healthful and delicious food samples. Members enjoy an informative quarterly newsletter, social activities, and discounts at many vegetarian-friendly restaurants and health food stores. For an application, call 944-8344. That's 944-8344. Or visit our website at www.vsh.org. vsh.org.
Thank you. Well, all Air Force pilots can stay in the back. The rest of you are going to have to do the best you can with this tiny little screen because, as you all know, AV equipment, audiovisual equipment, is extremely treacherous. And in this particular case, the power cord for that little projector unzipped the bag that it was in, and it climbed out over in Maui. And when we put things away, the power cord did not get back in, so we have no projector. Otherwise, you'd be seeing all this up on the screen. Okay, the presentation is something about the raw food diet. And before I get started, I'd like to mention that most of the videos that we have done in the past are now up online at our website. So if you go to vsh.org, you will see outstanding speakers from past events. Well, I was going to talk about raw food, and this is raw food. This is steak tartare, raw egg on a piece of raw cow with some raw onions and some raw capers in between. But that's not exactly what I had in mind, because if you ate that stuff, you would get over 300 milligrams of cholesterol. And 300 is the upper limit of the amount of cholesterol you should have in your diet. So I'm going to set a few ground rules. If you want to be healthy, number one thing is a vegan diet. The second thing is exercise. You have to choose vegan over raw. Why pick vegan? Because we're not sure that raw is all that great, but vegan we definitely know is. Exercise is not negotiable. You have to get some kind of exercise. You should probably pick 3 different kinds, because sooner or later something's going to bust, and if you are doing nothing but running and your foot goes bad, you'll have to switch to swimming or to bicycle riding or something like that. What fits your busy schedule better, exercising 1 hour a day or being dead 24 hours a day? And that's the way I feel about exercise. Now, I have my own kind of exercise. I go up 36 flights of stairs every day and do some light weightlifting, and then I swim in the ocean for half a mile every day. And then a couple of times a week, I go over to a gym and work out in gymnastics. This is a rope climb. That's pretty good upper body exercise. And I also bounce trampoline. However, we got kicked out of our primary tramp place, so I'm not doing as tough stunts as I used to, but these are the ones I can still do. I also find that there's nothing that organizes the mind quite as well as jumping out of an airplane at 14,000 feet and falling head down at 160 miles an hour. And I'm learning how to do that now. This is head down skydiving. And what is going on here is more of what I do most of the time, which is sit fly. It's kind of like falling through the air at 140 miles an hour on your butt. And a couple of weeks ago on 6'2", this was I also have a camera on my helmet, so I take pictures of other guys jumping, and this is more of the kind of skydiving you're used to seeing. We did a high altitude jump on the 2nd of June, went out at 23,000 feet. That meant we had to suck on oxygen from 14,000 up to 23,000. And here's some of the people that I jumped with. We got a 90-second free fall on this jump. Ordinarily you only get 60. And that same night we did a night jump. That was the Honolulu Stadium you're looking at, lit up at night. And this is what it looks like to land a parachute by the light of the moon and some truck lights. And this is my Ram Air parachute coming down with me under it. And Georgie got that picture. I really apologize we don't have the projector. It's going to be very much less of a show than it was over on Maui, but c'est la guerre. That's the way things go. Okay, so now on to the business at hand. I want to explain the ground rules. This is why vegetarian diets work. There are two classes of essential nutrients. There are minerals, and they are all the result of nuclear fusion processes that go on inside stars, and there are organic nutrients. The minerals are all elements in the periodic table, and they were cooked by stars that blew up 5 billion years ago at least. And all of the essential organic nutrients are the results of photosynthesis. They're all carbon compounds. They're synthesized by plants and microorganisms only. None of them are synthesized by animals. And they begin with the photosynthesis of glucose. And this little diagram blown up shows what's going on. The sunlight comes in here, it hits a photoreceptor in the plant cell. And the cell then takes water and carbon dioxide and oxygen and all of these elements, and it puts them together and makes glucose first. And from glucose, it then creates the 10 essential amino acids, the 2 essential fatty acids, all of the true vitamins, and all of these phytonutrients down here that we're just starting to know about. So all of the essential nutrients for humans come from plants. Now, if we were cats, I couldn't say that because cats require arachidonic acid, carnitine, retinol, and taurine. Those are essential metabolites for us. We do have to have them, but we don't have to have them in our diet because we can manufacture them ourselves. Now, I usually approach this from the scientific standpoint, and here you can see the evolutionary stages by which we arrived at our present magnificence. Primate evolution goes back 60 million years. If you don't like evolution, then I refer you to the first chapter of Genesis 1:29, where God tells man, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and that shall be yours for food. And I point out that there's no mention here of baking, boiling, frying, roasting. There's no meat, fish, eggs, poultry, dairy, and no chicken McNuggets. This is Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve as portrayed by Lucas Cranach, a 16th century German painter, and these are pretty good looking kids. You could stick them in bikinis and turn them loose on any beach in Hawaii and they'd fit right in. But somewhere along the line things went wrong, and here's God telling them what they should be eating and what they shouldn't be eating, but they went astray, as we all know. I show this slide. This is William Blake's painting of Satan exulting over Eve's fall. Now, William Blake was a vegetarian friend of ours. He was a 17th century mystic and painter. And we see Satan here with wings, and Eve is flaked out on the floor here with a serpent wrapped around her. Version of Adam and Eve getting kicked out of Eden, and as you can see they porked up a little bit since Cranach painted them, but this guy in the middle here is the one I want to point out to you. This is the devil, and he supposedly was responsible for us being thrown out of the Garden of Eden. Now to me this looks like a guy who has killed an animal and smeared himself with its blood and then put on its hooves and its horns and its tail, and it might be simple-minded to suggest that this is a parable of how evil comes into the world by killing animals. But I suppose that's oversimplification, and we should go to a more sophisticated explanation. There's a psychiatric phenomenon called projection, in which you find the things that are worst and least acceptable in your own personality and project them on somebody else. And I think that Satan is the guilty conscience of the human race. So back to evolution, we did not actually evolve from apes, but humans and apes have a common ancestor, and of course we've now evolved to this guy about 100 pounds overweight carrying a diet soda. And here's a couple of kids, and the caption here is, they banned soda pop in Los Angeles schools because they say it makes kids fat. The little girl is saying, what's next, Nintendo? But our remote ancestors were large vegetarian primates. Okay, now we're on to the bit about vegan diets, and there are 6 claims that are usually made by raw vegans. First one is it's living food with a life force because the enzymes are still there. And there's a certain amount of truth to that. Enzymes are the stuff of life, and once the enzymes have been denatured, the whatever it is no longer alive. And if you cook the food to 116 degrees, that's enough to stop the enzymes. It's true that cooking does denature the food, and it's also true that enzymes are the stuff of life. Let's say that you have a substrate here. Maybe it's a protein, maybe it's carbohydrate, maybe it's some other thing that you need in your body, and you want to break it into two parts. Now you have a couple of options here. One thing you can do is heat it up. You can just heat it up and it'll break up. But unfortunately, you apply that much heat and it'll kill everything else in the cell. So nature goes about its business by attaching enzymes to the substrate, and then the enzyme very cleverly splits the substrate into whatever parts it wants. This guy says that the enzymes that are present in the plants take precedence over your own digestive enzymes, and I take serious issue with that. And the reason is that we have a very complicated digestive system that has at least 24 important enzymes for digesting fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. And if the food could digest itself, I don't think that a parsimonious God or a sensible evolution ever would have given us all of those digestive functions. There's only one reference that I can find that supports this idea that food enzymes take precedence over your own digestive enzymes. And here are a list of all of the unpronounceable enzymes that you have, and I can hardly read them, so I'm not going to expect you to be able to read them either. But there are also 12 gastrointestinal hormones that give those digestive enzymes their marching orders. So in general, the live food that is present in the food that has not been cooked is going to be dead 10 minutes after you swallow it, because that's the whole purpose of digesting. You digest food to break it down to its most elementary form. You want to get at the amino acids, the fatty acids, and the sugars, and in as uncomplicated form as you can get at them. And that's what your digestive system is all about. And if you swallow the food, the enzymes, your own enzymes, are going to break down the enzymes that were in the food. So I discount that idea. There are some advantages of cooking. One of the advantages is that it hydrates and hydrolyzes nutrients, and it helps to break down dietary cellulose. And here we have a picture on the left, an animal cell and a plant cell over here. They have the same internal structures. They have important little organelles going on in there to conduct biochemical transactions. On the outside of the animal cell, there is a cell membrane made out of fat. And the plant cell has exactly the same arrangement, but on the outside of the plant cell there's a cell wall, and the cell wall is made out of fiber, and the fiber consists mostly of cellulose. Fiber is the nutritional traffic cop. You don't take anything away from this tonight except fiber. Remember, fiber is the difference between good food and bad food. No animal food has got any fiber at all. And processed food has either lost all of its fiber or most of it. So make sure that your food has fiber in it. Here are two types of utilizable sugars. One is starch. Starch has a frond-like structure. And it's easy to digest because you can get the amylase in between all of these little fronds, and it will break the starch up into its component sugars. Now this is a sheet of cellulose, which is very difficult to digest because the sheets are held together by hydrogen bonds, and it's very difficult to get digestive enzymes in between these hydrogen bonds. Furthermore, there's only one digestive enzyme that can break up cellulose, and that is cellulase. And humans and all animals lack cellulase. We're unable to digest cellulose, and that's maybe a good thing, because if we could, there'd be even more people in the world than there are, and there wouldn't be any trees left, because we would have turned into bipedal beavers and we'd be eating all the tree trunks. Beavers can digest cellulose, not by themselves, but they have bacteria in their gut that can do it. Here's another diagram of cellulose. And here's one of 5 cellulases. that is responsible for breaking up cellulose. And you can see that this is extraordinarily complicated structure, and its only purpose is to break off one molecule of glucose at a time. And all animals lack that. There's the good things and bad things about a vegan diet. The good thing is it's got a lot of fiber. The bad thing is it's got a lot of fiber. If you're a long distance man like Carl Lewis, the fiber doesn't get in your way because you don't have to bulk up. But if you want to be a man mountain like the present governor of California over on the right side here, you probably have to get your protein in a more readily absorbable form. This guy over here is Bill Pearl, and he beat Arnold Schwarzenegger a couple of times in international competition, but he's a lacto-vegetarian. He wasn't a vegan. It's hard for vegans to get that much protein into their system to really bulk up. And that's why vegans tend to be slender and healthy. But it's also why we don't have any vegan linebackers playing in the National Football League. Here are the 6 claimed advantages. I've embossed out number 1, that the living food has a life force. The second one is plant foods that can be eaten raw have vastly higher nutrient values than the foods that you have to cook, and I very strongly agree with that. This is a graph. The foods down at the bottom have the most nutrients, and they are foods that you can eat raw, namely spinach, V4 juice, romaine lettuce, a bunch of sprouts, and a whole bunch of vegetables, about 97 vegetables. By contrast, the foods that you have to cook in order to eat, like potato up here at the top, and brown rice and winter wheat and pasta, those foods pretty much have to be cooked, and they barely make it to this red RDA arrow, RDA being recommended dietary allowance. So the big advantage, the huge advantage of a raw diet is that it has much more nutrients than a cooked diet. So that also makes a raw vegan diet the easiest way to lose weight. And I don't need to point out to you that the #1 nutritional problem in the United States at the present time is that there are too many overweight people. Here's a cartoon. The doctor is saying, well, it seems that your weight is perfect. You just happen to be 11 feet too short. The reason you lose weight on a vegan diet, and particularly on a raw vegan diet, is that your stomach has a maximum capacity of about 1 liter. And you have a choice of what you're going to fill your stomach with. You can fill it with these leafy green vegetables and carrots and what else have you got in there? Onions, I guess. Cabbage. This is 400 calories of raw food in here. It's filled the stomach completely. You don't have any more room to put more food. You're going to quit eating because you've exhausted your stomach capacity. But here's 400 calories of chicken, and you can see there's still plenty of room for more food. 400 calories of oil, and you have even more room for more food. I did a little nutrient analysis and estimate that vegans have to eat about a third more food by weight and by volume in order to get the same number of calories as omnivores. And it's because the food takes up a lot of space in the stomach and it doesn't have many calories. So the reason you lose weight on any kind of vegan diet, but particularly a raw vegan diet, you meet your nutrient requirements long before you meet your calorie requirements, and your body then has to take the needed calories out of your fat stores. So when I was running the vegan lifestyle clinic over at Kaiser, the patients who were able to follow my advice generally lost about a pound a week. And you keep on losing it until you get back down to normal weight, and then there are all kinds of dodges to make sure you don't get too skinny. Well, here's some of the things that you won't be eating on a raw vegan diet. First of all, beans and grains go out the door because you can't eat them raw. Now, I hear somebody saying, oh, yes, you can. You can sprout those things. And it's true. You can sprout beans and grains. And the nutritional value of those foods goes up a little bit when you sprout them. But we're dealing with a little semantic problem because they're no longer really beans and grains. They're baby vegetables, and there's no doubt that the nutrient values will be better. You won't be using any potatoes because you can't eat raw potatoes. Potatoes are very indigestible unless they've been cooked. and oil goes out the door because that's a 100% fat product. It's just squeezed oil out of some plant food, maybe a seed, maybe an olive, but it's all fat. You won't be eating these vegan junk foods. Now, I don't want to condemn them entirely because they're good transitional foods if you're trying to get onto a vegan diet. Using some of these convenience and comfort foods will be a big help for you in learning how to do it. You won't be using any honey because that's not a vegan product, comes from bees, and you won't be using any sugar. I presume everybody here realizes that granulated sugar is a really bad idea. That stuff is what really makes you fat. Also, while raw nuts are okay, the ones that they put in a can have had usually oil and salt added to them, and they're not so good. And then we have bread. American bread is one of the true nutritional disasters. If you look at the label on the back of the bread, it'll look like a chemical formula. I can't pronounce half those things, and you probably don't want to hear me try. So, if man made it, don't eat it. Well, there's a book out with that title a couple of decades ago, and I wanted to try to find the cover of that book, but it's out of print now. Touch on the bean problem. As I said, you don't eat beans on a raw vegan diet, but beans are otherwise a pretty good food, except for the fact that they have 2 indigestible oligosaccharides. Those are sugars. The first one is stachyose, which is a 3-sugar molecule, and raffinose, which is a 4-sugar molecule. Now, if we could get at those sugars, those would be good foods for us. But unfortunately, in addition to lacking cellulase to digest cellulose, we also lack the enzymes necessary to digest these 2 things. And here is a cartoon character saying some like chili with beans, some like chili without beans, and the second group likes elevators without the first group. And we can probably all figure out why that is. Let me explain something I should have mentioned long ago. The problem with fiber and all undigestible materials that you eat is that while you can't digest them, they will eventually dump into your large intestine where there are bacteria that can digest anything, virtually anything. And when they do it, they produce a lot of noxious gases, and that is where the bad reputation for beans comes from. Here's another joke about beans. First of all, we can quote Pythagoras, who is our founding vegetarian member. He lived 580 BC, and he was responsible for the famous theorem that the squaw on the hippopotamus is equal to the sum of the squaws on the other 2 hides, which is a very bad joke that only geometers will get. And here's another joke about it. Here's a couple of guys who are marooned on a desert island. There's nothing there to eat except refried beans, and one guy is saying, "Enough, Hank, I'm tired of pulling your finger." And that's a Howley joke, so if you don't get it, don't feel bad. Here's another problem. This is the CEO problem. Supposing you're the chief executive officer of a company that runs a big fast food chain, and you look at this food and you're thinking, hey, this is all fat, sugar, and salt. Now, what can we do that will not be so harmful to the public? So you decide that you'll put a Boca Burger over here, and you replace this big gulp here with some V8 juice, which happens to be one of the few things that comes in a can that is really nutritious. And you get rid of these salted French fries and you put in a real baked potato. What's going to happen? Well, the people that eat this stuff will get healthier, but your profit margin will go down. And at the next quarter, when it's found that the company's not making as much money, you'll be out looking for a job, and there will be a less scrupulous CEO replacing you. Here's a list of some of the things that you can eat on a raw vegan diet. What I've found is that just about any combination of raw nuts and seeds and raw vegetables or raw fruits will meet the recommended dietary allowance for virtually everything, providing that you get a dependable source of this stuff, which is vitamin B12, this little red and white and blue molecule in here. You do have to get that because it's not found in any plant foods. That is not because it is not synthesized by plants. The animals have vitamin B12 because B12 is manufactured by the bacteria in their gut, and they are able to absorb the B12 after it's made, and we've lost that ability if we ever had it. So once again, fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, nuts and seeds, you got it made as far as nutrients go. Well, now we have an idea in vegetarian circles that the food you eat should be high carb, low fat. How many people have heard that? Just so I have an idea, okay? A lot of people know about high carb, low fat. I don't see any reason to follow that advice. And I've been trying to find out where it came from, and the best I can figure out is that these two guys started it. The fellow on the right here is Ancel Keys, who was a famous epidemiologist at the University of Minnesota back in the 1950s, and he went around to various countries, and he found that the countries that consumed the least fat had the lowest incidence of cardiovascular disease. And this fellow over on the left was Ken Carroll. He was also a very good epidemiologist at the University of Western Ontario. And he did similar studies showing that the more fat you ate, the greater your risk for cancer. Here's one of his charts. This is the rate of death from breast cancer up this y-axis, and over here is dietary fat down this axis. And you can see all of these countries are going up in a very linear fashion. The more fat, the more breast cancer. I used the same data and found that there is an even higher correlation with just animal calorie consumption, not just fat consumption. The highest correlation is with just eating animal foods. Well, the problem with damning all fat on the basis of these studies is that Food and Agriculture Organization data was being used to make these charts. And the Food and Agriculture Organization, abbreviated FAO, does not keep data on the disappearance of raw nuts and seeds. It keeps disappearance data on animal fat and vegetable fat, animal protein, vegetable protein, animal calcium, that's milk, vegetable calcium, which is leafy greens, and animal iron and vegetable iron. But no mention in there of raw nuts and seeds, either by the FAO or by Keys and Carroll. And I went so far as to download Acrobat versions of their papers, and I searched those papers for mentions of seeds and nuts. So there were no mentions of nuts. They were not talking about nuts. And the only time they ever mentioned seed, it was either preceded by or followed by the word oil. They were talking about seed oils, not raw seeds. So how much raw seeds and nuts do we actually consume? Well, this is what the USDA says about it. The USDA reports that only 10% of calories in the United States come from vegetables, fruits, legumes, nuts, and soy. The rest of it is stuff that I wouldn't think of eating. About 22% of calories in the United States come from fats and oils. As I pointed out, those are non-nutritious food. They've only got fat in them. A lot of grain products, a lot of sugars and sweets, and meat and dairy products, but only 10% of it is vegan, and of that 10%, it turns out that only about 0.5% of the calories consumed in the United States can be attributed to raw nuts and seeds. So why are these guys saying, well, if you eat a raw nut or a raw seed, you're no longer playing the right ball game. You're going into the high fat region and you're going to get sick and it's going to be bad for you. They don't have any good scientific backing for this argument. Keys and Carroll set the stage, and I think the information was picked up by various vegetarian writers, and it has been erroneously passed on to us for the last 30 or 40 years, and there's no reason for it. Now, I'm not telling you that you should eat raw nuts and seeds. If you're already a high-carb, low-fat vegan and you're perfectly satisfied with it, stick with it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But the problem is that there's no rational reason why you should do that. And when you cut the nuts out of your diet, this bottom line in this chart is nuts and seeds. And they have the highest content of alpha-linolenic acid, which is the first of the omega-3 fatty acids, which is very important for proper nutrition. And they also have a lot of protein. Well, now, how many people know Michael Clapper? He's spoken to us a number of times. He's a physician who has been very concerned with what he calls failure to thrive in vegans. And when he spoke to us last, he said that when he started off as a vegan back in the 70s, there were hundreds of people vegan, and they were all very enthusiastic. And now in 2007, they've all switched back. They're no longer vegan. What happened? So he wanted to try to find out what had happened and why so many people dropped out of the vegan diet. And I think I know what the reason is. A vegan diet is a very restrictive diet to begin with. You've cut out all the animal food out of your diet. And then if you decide to make it not only vegan, but high carb, low fat, you've broken the camel's back. And there's no reason to do that. I think if these writers had been saying, well, it's okay to eat anything that comes from the plant kingdom, including those high-fat seeds, nuts, and avocados, I think a lot of people would have stayed on board. But they got tired of eating nothing but potatoes and rice, and they quit. The reason that it's such a mistake to demonize fat the way we have is that without fat, there would be no life. Every cell membrane in your body is made out of fat. This is a diagram of the cell membrane. It has two layers of phospholipids. The little blue dots on top are the phosphoryl group. They're soluble in water. These fatty acids and phospholipids sticking down in the middle are soluble in each other. There's cholesterol in here enforcing the cell membrane. And over here on the left side, you see the absolutely perfect segregation scheme. This is a hemisphere of lipids, fats. On the outside, there's water. On the inside, there is water with very organized biochemical activities going on the inside, and this is absolutely fundamental to life processes everywhere, not just in the human body. All life depends on this phospholipid bilayer. And without it, there wouldn't be any life. To say that we should not eat any fat because it's bad for us is like saying that we should not consume one of the fundamental substances in our body. Now, once again, I'm not talking about eating refined oils. I think those are really bad news. They've been found to cause cancer in rats. They're 100% fat. They scoot into your bloodstream almost without any interference. They go in through the lacteals. They go in through the cell membranes themselves. You just get a huge blob of chylomicrons floating around in your lymphatic system as a result of that, and that's not good for you. Well, for those who like more exotic fare and who are gourmet chefs, here's some stuff from the Blossoming Lotus over on Kauai. These are all raw recipes, believe it or not, and they are the best tasting stuff I've ever had. You can buy this 7-Minute Chef cookbook by going to just type in Blossoming Lotus, and you can buy a PDF cookbook that you can put on your computer's hard drive, and you can copy recipes out of it and type them out if you want, and you don't have to take up any space in your bookshelf. It's a really brilliant idea. The website for this says www.onedegree.com/7minute-chef/index. But if I were you, I would just type in 7-Minute Chef. That'll get it to you. Okay, here's a local outfit. This is Sylvia's Licious Dishes. And Sylvia Thompson is here somewhere. Yeah, could you stand up for a second, Sylvia? Sylvia has opened up a raw vegan catery down at the Dole Cannery. So if you want to get some really exotic and also gourmet vegan foods, raw foods, try that out. She demonstrated at one of our meetings this marvelous bisque that was made out of zucchini and shaved fennel. I'd never even seen fennel before, but it turns out fennel is a large bulb-like plant, and it's got a delicious taste. And here's some broccoli stuffed mushrooms over on this side. They're also raw. While we were on Maui, we dropped in on the Fresh Mint restaurant in Paia and got these glorious things. These are spring rolls. They're not quite raw because they got rice paper wrappers on the outside, but they really look good and they taste just delicious. You dip them in peanut sauce. Well, I'm a much more plebeian sort of guy. I don't do gourmet cooking. I just cook so I can eat. This is my very favorite recipe. I take some frozen orange juice, some frozen strawberries, some raw sunflower and sesame seeds and a little flax seed and some nutritional yeast that has B12 in it, and I stick them in a blender. A Vitamix blender is the only one that'll do it. Don't try to do these recipes if you don't have a Vitamix. I can see I'm going to be in the middle of a cat fight here in a minute. But I've had a Vitamix for 40 years. And the one thing I can tell you is that you can't make these recipes with a department store blender. You can't do it with a Waring or an Osterizer. You got to have either a Vitamix or the Blendtec. And I haven't tried the Blendtec. She may be right.
Come on over sometime. I'll show you.
You're on. I'll be there tomorrow. Yeah, my favorite recipe is frozen strawberries, frozen orange juice, raw sunflower seeds, raw sesame seeds. Make sure you get them unhulled. Don't buy the hulled sesame seeds. Unhulled sesame seeds have 1,100 milligrams of calcium per 100 grams, whereas the hulled sesame seeds are down to 400 milligrams. So you lose a whole lot of calcium when you take off that hull. And then I put in a little Red Star nutritional yeast to get some vitamin B12 and also about a tablespoon of flaxseed. And this is a nutrient analysis. If you can't see it, this is the RDA arrow here. This fruit smoothie meets the RD for everything, including protein, but just barely for protein. And it's got huge amounts of everything else. There is a slight debate here, slight question as to whether this is really raw. Now, in theory, it is raw, but in practicality, the frozen food companies blanch their food. Anybody have an idea why they would do that? Exactly. Who said that? Okay, they blanch the food because they want to kill the enzymes. If the enzymes are still active, they will spoil the food even though it's frozen. So they do it, they just heat it up enough to kill the enzymes, and so it's not really quite raw, but it sure beats juicing a whole crate of oranges every time you make it. And here's another one. This is definitely raw, with the exception that you might quibble over the fact that it's been done in a blender. This is kale, there's arugula, carrot, onion, the same seeds as before, and some garlic. And this is maybe cheating a little bit down here. There's a cup of balsamic vinegar. But the nutrient values on this stuff is even better than the fruit smoothie because here's the RDA arrow, and you're past the RDA for protein and way past for everything else. That's really good food. Pretty easy to make. One of the nice things about these blenderized recipes, it only takes me about 5 minutes and I'm ready to eat. Okay, now why use a blender? Let's figure out what the advantage is for using a blender. Let's start with a macadamia nut, and let's pretend that macadamia nut is perfectly spherical, and we're going to break it into a whole bunch of little macadamia nuts, and we want to see what happens to the digestive quality of the macadamia nut. Now remember, we started with one macadamia nut. We're going to break it into a whole bunch of little pieces, and what's going to happen is, because of geometry, the volume of a sphere is 4/3 pi r cubed. The area of a sphere is 4 pi r squared. So when you do the math, which is over here, and there won't be any exams at the end of this, so you don't have to worry about that, but I will tell you that the result is that the surface area that is exposed to your digestive enzymes goes up as the cube root of the number of particles you break the original macadamia nut into. So if you start with one macadamia nut and you break it into 1,000 particles, you've got 10 times as much surface area. Obviously, your enzymes, here, let's pretend this is a macadamia nut here. Your enzymes could only get at the outside of the macadamia nut. They can't get at the inside because there's stuff in between the outside and the inside. And they can only reach the surfaces that they can reach. Now, if you break it into 1,000,000 particles, you get 100 times as much surface area. If you break it into a trillion, you get 1,000 times as much surface area, and so forth and so on. The smaller the particles are, the more chance that food has of actually being digested. So now we've gotten down to number 4. I discount the idea that it's living food because it's not alive after it has been digested by you. I do accept that the plant foods that you can eat raw have much higher nutrient values. Raw vegan is the easiest way to lose weight, and raw foods obviate the need for salt. And this is going to be a little anecdotal on my part. I went raw vegan when I got to an age of about 70 because the alternative was to start taking pills. And the reason is kind of circuitous reasoning here, but I don't see any way that you can eat cooked vegetables unless you put salt on them. And my problem was that I'm very sensitive to salt, and so 3 things were happening. I was getting pretibial edema, which is another way of saying ankle swelling, mild high blood pressure, back and neck pain. Most of the back and neck pain is a result of having planted myself on the trampoline on a number of occasions when I was much younger, and knee pain. And all symptoms in me are replicable by adding table salt, and they're relieved by avoiding the salt. And the only way I can think of to avoid salt is to eat your food raw. Yeah, even sea salt. Sea salt is salt, sodium chloride, regardless of what else they put in it. It's always sodium chloride. Now, what's wrong with salt? Well, what's wrong with salt is that it's got to stay on the right side of your cell membranes. It's supposed to be on the outside. The salt is supposed to be a major constituent of your blood. And on the inside of the cell is supposed to be potassium. Well, this is a sodium pump here, a schematic. Here is the lipid bilayer that makes up your cell membrane. And the sodium is going out and the potassium is coming in. And there are between 800,000 and 30 million of these little tiny things on each cell membrane in your body. And that means there's about 10 to the 13th of them in your entire body. Now, these are tiny little things, and I think that as you get older, they either down-regulate or they go on sabbatical or they break, and they don't do the job they're supposed to do. So sodium starts coming on to the inside of the cell, and it doesn't belong in there. The sodium's supposed to be out here in the extracellular fluid, and the potassium's supposed to be on the inside. And that all breaks down when you eat salt. Now, as you know, salt has osmotic properties. On this side of the semi-permeable membrane are a large number of sodium atoms, and on this side there are not so many sodium atoms. So what happens is that the water goes over here where the sodium atoms are, and it raises the elevation of the water. There's more water on this side than there is on this side. The reason we don't need to, question back there?
Why salt?
No, salt is salt. You can play all kinds of name games with salt, but when you get right down to it, it's sodium chloride. And you may find that there are some types of salt that will cause less trouble, but the best kind of salt is no salt at all. You do have to have a certain amount of sodium in your diet, but you don't have to have a whole lot because you've got a hormone called aldosterone. It's actually made from cholesterol. You make it from the cholesterol that you make yourself. So you don't need to go down to the store and buy this stuff, but aldosterone selectively reabsorb sodium from the distal tubule of the kidney in exchange for potassium. Well, now here are three anatomic structures that really don't like salt. First one is an artery. This artery has got 6 layers in it, and all of those layers are capable of absorbing excess sodium, and when that happens, the arterial wall swells up imperceptibly, but enough to stiffen the artery. And for any of you who carry the diagnosis of essential hypertension, it's my opinion that there's nothing essential about it. It's not idiopathic. It's not something that we don't know the cause of. It's the result of eating excessive amounts of salt. It stiffens up your arteries, and the stiff artery is what causes the elevated blood pressure. And I found out about that because my blood pressure started going up, and I could bring it back down by not eating salt. And as I mentioned, I had a number of prangs in my back and neck, including some herniated discs, and generally they weren't causing much trouble until got to be about 70, and then these little herniated areas started absorbing the sodium and swelling up and pushing on the nerve roots, and life got very unpleasant at that point. But fortunately, by avoiding salt, all those symptoms go away. And then here is a joint cartilage. As you get older, you find that running becomes more and more painful, and it's partly because the cartilage does not have a very good blood supply to begin with, but if you're stuffing it full of sodium in addition, things are going to get even worse because the cartilage is going to swell up. It's got a very poor blood supply, and it needs to keep that excess sodium out. So if you stop eating the stuff or stop adding it to your food, a lot of those symptoms will go away. And as I said, the only way I found to eat vegetables without putting salt on them is to eat them raw. And that does not include potatoes and the stuff that you usually cook. The actual need for sodium in the diet is about 300 milligrams a day. In spite of that, the Food and Nutrition Board, completely irrationally, in my opinion, sets the RDA for sodium at 1,100 to 3,300 milligrams a day. That's the equivalent of 1 to 3 teaspoons of salt a day. And that's what most Americans are eating. And there's no need to do it. For one thing, doctors have been putting patients on 500 milligram sodium diets for over 100 years now, and there are no side effects except that the patients don't like it very well because people all like salt. Okay, on to another claim. Raw foods generally contain more water. Well, that's pretty much a no-brainer. They do. Obviously, lettuce and spinach and fruit are loaded with water, and the fruits and the vegetables are way out ahead of everything else here. The one food that you can't eat raw that doesn't have much water are the nuts and the seeds, and they're pretty dry. Having water, why do we need water? Well, we're made mostly out of water. By weight, the majority of our weight is water. All the things that are going on inside our cells require water to function. And furthermore, to the extent that you have any shot at all of digesting cellulose, you need enough water to get it in between those sheets of cellulose so that the hydrogen bonds are keeping it out of. So the raw food's got a lot of water. Somebody last night asked me about, they said, well, hey, you're saying you shouldn't eat grains? The USDA says you ought to eat lots of grains. In fact, the USDA food pyramid has got grains on the very bottom because those are the healthiest foods, and they're full of fiber. You won't get enough fiber if you don't eat grains. So this afternoon, when I should have been looking for the power cord for that projector, I was doing a graph to see if what he said was really true. And of course, all of these animal foods at the top of this graph have no fiber at all, but of the plant foods, the foods that have the most fiber are not the grains. They've got a lot of fiber, but the vegetables and the fruits. And that was a bit of a surprise to me too. It's a different kind of fiber, but you know, for a vegan to worry about whether he's getting enough fiber is like worrying about whether enough coal gets to Newcastle. You got tons of that stuff in any kind of vegan diet. Okay, raw foods contain more antioxidants, absolutely. The USDA does not have a complete list of antioxidants in food. In fact, it only keeps tabs on about 8 different ones, but almost all of the antioxidants are contained in plant foods, not in animal foods. The brown lines on top are the content of the animal foods for these antioxidant and phytonutrients, and the green bars are the plant foods, but there's a catch here. This is a logarithmic x-axis, and it makes it look as if the animal foods actually have some antioxidants, but when you do it with a normal axis, the animal foods virtually disappear. Animal foods have almost no antioxidants, and there's a reason for that. The reason that plants have antioxidants is because plants are sitting out in the sun 12 hours a day, and they're getting bombed by photons coming in from the sun, and they have to have those antioxidants to protect them from the solar radiation that is going to break them down. Here's an example of oxidative stress. If you don't have enough antioxidants in your body, or every cell will be subject to oxidative stress because you have a lot of little free radicals bouncing around inside the cell and they knock over the furniture. The thing that gives you the best shot at stopping those adverse reactions is to get lots of antioxidants into your diet. So here's one type of oxidative stress. It's more complicated than I care to explain, but it's going on inside the inside wall of an artery. Here's another diagrammatic of that same phenomenon. And here is the one that you need to most to know about. The oxidative stress affects your DNA. It does genetic damage to every cell in your body. And eventually it wears us all down. And so here's another example of oxidative stress. We have a pyramid of people, starting with a young one over here and an old one over here. And the young guy is starting out with nice fresh genes that his parents passed on to him. And he grows up and he has children of his own, preferably at a time when his genes are still healthy enough to pass on good stuff to the next generation. And then this man and this woman peak out at about 50, and then it's downhill. Now, regardless of how well you take care of yourself, how abstemious and exercise conscious a vegan you may be, you're going to be subject to these oxidative stresses, and eventually you wind up down here, an old person, all worn out. Now, I don't know any way to get around that because these oxidative processes are not only the result of bombardment by cosmic rays and solar rays, but they are the result of processes that go on as part of normal metabolism in your body. Things get busted, they bounce around, they knock over the furniture, and things go south. But your best chance to fight off this problem is to eat lots of this stuff, because that's where all the antioxidants are, and you won't get them from animal food, you'll only get them from plant food. I want to point out one other thing that we don't get onto in nutrition lectures, but it has to do with the ethics of what we eat. All life has characteristic of growth, metabolism, movement, reproduction, response to stimuli. Here's somebody cutting a tomato in half. The tomato is still alive, even though it's been cut in half, because you could tissue culture the tomato if you were so inclined. You'd have to do some pretty highfalutin laboratory work to set it up so you could do it. But on the other side, there's a sheep, and the sheep is about to undergo a transition from this life into the next with a knife. And there's one difference, two differences between the tomato and the sheep. The sheep has the characteristic of growth, metabolism, movement, reproduction, response to stimulus, but it's also got a nervous system and it's conscious. So when you kill this sheep, you're not killing its cells. The cells will still be able to undergo tissue culture, but you're killing the sheep, and the sheep was conscious and it didn't want that to happen. So there are the 6 claimed advantages of a raw vegan diet. I discount the first one. I don't think the life force is anything more than leftover 19th century metaphysics. Plants foods that can be eaten raw have vastly higher nutrient values than the ones that require cooking. Raw vegan is the easiest way to lose weight. Raw foods obviate the need for salt. Raw foods generally have more water and they have a lot more antioxidants. There's one other thing I wanted to point out. You may all have read about a recent thing that was up in the New York Times. A lady named Nina Plank wrote an article called Death by Veganism. She blamed the death of a very badly raised and badly nourished infant on the fact that the parents were trying to raise the kid on a vegan diet. Well, they didn't know what vegan diet meant. Their idea of vegan diet was soy milk and apple juice, and the kid died at 6 weeks at the weight of about 3 pounds. So Jack Norris from a vegan health organization went out and got pictures of all these healthy vegan kids, and they looked pretty good to me. I don't know if you can see them, but these are very healthy looking little babies that not only were raised vegan, but their parents or their mothers were vegan while they were pregnant with them. And here's what the kids looked like when they got older. They're perfectly healthy looking vegan children. And so thanks for listening. I'm sorry that the great Zuzu took away my audiovisual, but that's it. Thanks. Can you still get your nutrition from a vegan diet when you get old and gray? Well, apparently I'm here. Yeah. Okay, the question is, my doctor advised olive oil to bring up my good cholesterol and take down my bad cholesterol. Does it seem to be working? Has it brought your... You haven't been testing? Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of evidence that olive oil will help adjust your cholesterol indices. But the best way to solve the cholesterol problem is don't eat it in the first place and get plenty of fiber, because the fiber takes the cholesterol out. The best way to get your good cholesterol, I presume you're talking about HDL, high density lipoprotein. The best way to raise that is get lots of exercise. If you have other questions, why come on up here and I'll answer. Thanks a lot.
This program is brought to you by the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, a nonprofit organization dedicated to sharing with the community the many benefits of a vegetarian diet. Free monthly meetings include vegetarian experts found locally and on the mainland, quick and easy cooking demonstrations, and healthful and delicious food samples. Members enjoy an informative quarterly newsletter, social activities, and discounts at many vegetarian-friendly restaurants and health food stores. For an application, call 944-8344. That's 944-8344. Or visit our website at www.vsh.org. vsh.org.